You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network.
Hello there, and welcome back to Force Perspectives for the Acolyte's 6th episode, Teach/Corrupt. I am your host, Michael Cohen, and joining me, as always, my pupil, my Acolyte, Joe Hogan.
Listen, man, I saw you skinny dipping. I said, this man raises a lot of good points. I think I'm going to join him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other people, not skinny dipping, for the record.
Man, what an episode. Star Wars was like, I last week was like, hey, are you guys excited by this? And we were like, yes. And they were like, cool. Well, wait till you see what we got in store this week. This is the horniest Star Wars ever. Just like straight off the bat, I'm going to go ahead and say that this episode was unabashedly, like rampantly erotically charged on one side of it, and then the complete opposite on the other side of it. I guess we kind of have three components to the story in this episode, right? We've got Osha and Kymir on the quote unquote unknown planet. We'll talk about that. And then we've got Sol and May and Basil. I guess and Pip as well. On the name of the ship is the Poland, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, that's in the trivia thing this week. So they're on the ship, and then we've got Vernestra and her underlings, for lack of a better term. Yeah, Mog and others, but Mog.
I got Elden Ring vibes from that. Because there's a bad guy named Mog in Elden Ring.
Oh, nice.
I was like, he doesn't look like Mog, but okay.
So yeah, we kind of have those three things going on. So let's get the least interesting one out of the way first, which I think is Sol and May. That one was a little bit odd to me because there was kind of like a build up and like last week of like this deception, and then it hasn't gone anywhere yet, but like it is going somewhere. But I found it a little bit curious because it was kind of I don't know. Do you think that Sol realized that was May before he confronted her? Like, because I kind of get the feeling that like that he was playing her to a certain degree.
I felt that way, and I'm trying to remember what it was, but then there was something that made me think otherwise. But then he did know, and he obviously was playing her. But now that I'm trying to remember what it was. I don't know. There was some like little thing that he said or did or whatever. Because like at first I was like, oh well, he's turning his back to her and he's trusting her to do this. But like at the same time, it like could be part of the playing her part. But I feel like there was something he said or did that was like, oh yeah, no, he has no idea. But then he obviously did. So I don't know. I'm with you though. I was of the impression that he was, but I honestly teetered back and forth a little bit on it.
Yeah. I think like in the lead up to getting on the ship, I don't think that he suspected, but then once they were on the ship, I think honestly I think that when he saw Pip, like that to me, if there's a point that he didn't know and then he did know, to me like that is the most likely turning point, is like when he saw Pip and he saw that Pip had been reset, right, with the red eyes. That, and then he makes his comments, right? Like that's when he starts sort of like I feel like probing a little bit to confirm a suspicion, and then the things that she says, I think um, confirm how he's feeling, and so then he sort of sets it up and essentially traps her, right?
Mm.
But yeah, I'm like it's very interesting. I'm really curious to see where that's going. This is the thing about the show, is that even in moments like that where I'm like, I'm not exactly sure what's going on here, because the rest of it has been so good, and because in general it just has been so good. I'm like, well, like I trust that this is going somewhere. Like this is not, it's not like in Mando where it's like, what's that about? And it's like, and then it just never gets addressed again, and then we just move on, and it's like, yeah, like there's just these like frayed edges to that story of like threads that just kind of go off and then abruptly terminate, right? Like
Mm.
I that whole universe of storytelling that they've got going on right now is one of those ones where it's like, you guys really don't have much of a plan here, do you? You're just kind of making it up as you go, and it can be very obvious. Whereas with this show, it's quite the opposite, where it's like, oh, everything is intentional, to the point where like things that we're not even thinking about, they're thinking about, right? And then they put out these trivia things, and it's like, okay, cool, yeah, like there's all this stuff. So yeah, I trust that this is going somewhere, that the whole so I mean, like I don't even try, it's fairly obvious that next week will be us getting the flashback and getting the rest of that story, right?
Mm.
Getting Soul's side of the story, and uncovering some of those mysteries. The I think the only question that I have at this point is, how much was Soul involved in sort of the decision making process on that? Because when I look back at the third episode and the flashback, it's very clear to me that there's a hierarchy of the Jedi that are there, right?
Mm.
That it's Indara is the leader of that group. Soul is like sort of the next one, Kelnaka, and then obviously Torben, being a Padawan, is at the bottom of the heap there, right? Um, but I think that what we're gonna find out is that Soul didn't agree with Indara's decisions, right? Like that there was definitely conflict there, but I think more important than any of that is that I think the next week we'll find out what Vernestra's role was in all of this, and
Mm-hmm.
like her sending them there, and her connection to that. But yeah, I guess that what do you think? Do you have anything else to say about Soul and May?
Um, I guess it's more a clarification that I have.
Sure.
So, do we think Soul didn't stick around because, like, he clearly was sending the transmission, and then when he found out they were coming, he was like, "Oh, well, I'm out of here." Do you think that's because he was, I guess, trying to protect May until he could do whatever he has to do? Um, whether it's, I mean, he left, so he's not. I guess that's not true. Maybe I'm like, I don't know where he went. Like, why did he leave if not to
Yeah.
protect May from everything until he can kind of get answers and I guess tell the truth, because he says, I'm going to tell the truth, like I'm going to tell the
Yeah.
Jedi Council everything. um is that why he's leaving? And if that's why he's leaving, what is it he's going to do next? Like, where is he going now?
Yeah. I think my read on it is that once he realized that it was May and not Osha, I the Jedi Council will take May, right?
Mm-hmm.
And God knows what they'll do to her, right? Like I think that's kind of like at this point, I don't think that he trusts the Jedi Council necessarily in this respect, right? And I think we'll find out more about why that is next week. But I think that his his thought process is that May can lead him to Chimere, and Chimere has Osha, and his
Okay.
priority right now is to rescue Osha, and to reunite her with May and to fix the mistakes that he made in the past.
Mm.
um and so yeah, like once he realizes that they're on the way, I think that's when he's like okay, we have to go somewhere else. I think they're going to Brendok. Like I think that's that Soul is going to take her back to Brendok to tell her the truth of what happened.
Mm.
I think that I don't think that it'll be as straightforward a flashback episode as the last one was, right? Because the last flashback episode was the entirety of the episode, right? Just start to finish,
Mm.
16 years ago. I think that I think that it will be framed more as I think that there will be two sides to it. I think that what we'll get is Soul and May on Brendok and him revealing his truth of what happened, and that will be played against Osha with the helmet on, unlocking her potential and remembering what happened,
Mm.
remembering what actually happened and not what the Jedi have told her, which is what we saw, right? Because I think that's the case, is that like everything from the time that May shows up, I think is I think it's implanted memories. Because that's when the episode starts to feel off. That's when the episode starts to feel wonky. And like I said about the whole Soul May storyline in this episode, it's like uh, we have gotten such great storytelling across this series. If there's anything that feels weird, it's because we're meant to feel it as weird,
Mm.
right? Like that's that it's not that like the storytelling has fallen short. It's that like no, that's the intention. We're supposed to be questioning the last third of that episode. We're supposed to be looking at it and going, this is what, no, this doesn't feel right. What happened? Right? Like that resolved itself real quick. That why was Soul there? Right? Like all these questions that we've asked, they're not, that's not us like when we're watching Mando or Ahsoka or Book of Boba Fett, we're like what like wait why are they what, right? Where we're like confused by the show. Even Bad Batch, I think that happened in this last season, where we're like, I don't really understand what they're getting at in this episode, right? It's not that, which is us trying to figure out like, where does this fall short, how come this isn't resonating, but more so it's like it's the intention of Leslie Headland that we are sitting there going like, wait a second, right? Like that's the mystery. um so yeah, I think that Osha is going to see her part of it, and what actually happened, like fully what happened, as part of her embracing her power and all of that sort of thing.
Mm.
And I think that we'll discover that it was maybe not as cut and dry as she presently recalls it, right? Because something has to move her more towards the dark side.
Mm.
Something outside of like Chimera is leading her to the entrance of the cave in the way that Yoda leads Luke to the entrance of the cave, but then she has to go in and face that trial herself, right? And so I think, yeah, like that's the way that the episode ends. That's to me setting that up, but that on the flip side of it, Soul is going to reveal to May what the Jedi did, why they did it, right? And try to explain to her. But he obviously recognizes that what they did was wrong, right? Like he acknowledges it as a mistake. And yeah, so like yeah, I think that's where we're headed. I think that's
Mm.
where we're headed
Okay.
with it. Yeah.
Okay.
I
Cool.
let's shift to Vernestra and that
Oh man.
storyline.
Oh man. Come. She's the Sith, right? She has to be the Sith.
I mean, like I absolutely think so. I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely think so. Um, so here's a component. That whole thing of like her not wanting to travel through hyperspace. Um, I guess what happens is that when she's in hyperspace, she gets visions.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's it's and it's unpleasant. Um, Imagine if you were getting visions of what's coming, say 200 years in the future.
Mm-hmm.
um, Visions of the balance of power shifting, and you were getting those when you were like 16 years old as like the youngest Jedi Knight in the Order, and all of that sort of thing. And yeah, over time, I think that might influence you. I think that might sway you. I think that might move you towards some decision making that is a little bit, less than ideal for the Jedi Order. I don't know that we're gonna get a full explanation by the end of this season as to how Vernestra became the Sith Master, but I do think I do still maintain that's what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm starting to think, as we sort of like, I started to discuss last night, I over chat, like those scars on Chimere's back they look like whiplashes,
Yeah,
right?
they sure
I
do.
Yeah, and why reveal her weapon in this episode in such a kind of like nonchalant, like inconsequential way, if not to put the audience on the trail of, okay, like here's Chimere's weird scars on his back, here's Vernestra's weapon,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for us to connect those dots. Um, I think one of the other things that is interesting is that Mog is pretty clearly afraid of Vernestra, right?
Mm-hmm.
He has an apprehension in talking to her. The StarWars.com website has made it really clear he is not her Padawan. He works in
Oh,
her office.
okay.
Like that's the way that they term it. He works in her office, so she is essentially like an administrator, right? Like I think we got
Right.
the kind of the sense that she leads that council, right?
Mm-hmm.
The one that Kiadi Mundi and some of those other Jedi were on. But yeah, I get the impression from Mog that there's there's a great deal of fear there in
Mm-hmm.
dealing with Vernestra, and I don't know, Mog I don't think understands what that apprehension or fear is, but but it's clearly there, right? Um, and it's also like the component of like, oh, you're gonna come with us. Uh, okay, are you sure that that's what you want to do, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's some weirdness going on there that yeah, I I I I don't expect any Jedi to sense a Sith Lord, right? Because I think that it has now been clearly established by the prequels and reinforced by the Acolyte that the Jedi are not able to sense the dark side in that way,
Right.
right? They're not able to sense these dark side Force users. Um, and I think that is very simply explained because the Sith are like it's how they've survived, right? So they literally can mask their power, because it's not until Chimere wants to be seen by them that Soul senses him, right? Um, because presumably he's like in the last episode he was already there, right? When they all arrived, he was already there somewhere in the shadows because he had just killed Kelnaka. So like it wasn't until he made his presence known and announced himself to the Jedi that Soul was able to sense them,
Mm-hmm.
to sense him. And I think also Soul picked up on it before everybody else because Soul is a little bit more in tune with the dark side because of some of the decisions that he's made. So
Mm-hmm.
so there was a
Okay.
little bit of like there's a little bit more familiarity. Think about it this way, right? And we talked as fans, as a community, we talked about this a lot with the Phantom Menace, right? The idea that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan have such a hard time fighting Darth Maul because they've not trained for that scenario,
Mm.
right? The Sith have been gone for over a millennia, and they're extinct. Why why train with your lightsaber to fight another Force user? Like that's like what an absurd thing. The Jedi, or like no Jedi fall anymore. We've solved that problem, right? It's their arrogance. And I think that in the same way, it's like over that millennia, I think that the Jedi just have simply lost the ability to sense the dark side in that way, right? Like they're not in tune with it. They are so focused on their own path and their own teachings that the idea that you would teach Padawans about the dark side in that way, it's like, well, that's just going to lead to temptation, right? So they're almost it's like an abstinence sort of thing, right? And as a result, it's like they're not educated on the subject,
Mm.
right? So if you have some Jedi who have maybe made some bad choices and they have touched the dark side, which I think next week we'll find out that like that's essentially what has happened. And Soul kind of talked about that in this episode where he pushed me to a place that you know I'm not comfortable that I
Mm.
went there, right? And it's like I think that was a return to that place. I don't think that was Soul's first time experiencing that aspect of the Force, right? Um, so I think there's a lot going on there, and I think like all of that is sort of to just get to the idea that like if Vernestra is the Sith Master, there's no way that any of them would know. There's no way that any of them would know. Because they just like they're not trained, they're not attuned to sense that sort of thing. Um, and Sith and powerful dark side Force users, they exercise an extreme amount of control, right?
Mm.
Like that's what made Kylo Ren so different, right? Like when you look at Kylo Ren as compared to the rest of the Darksiders that we know, like all of the Darksiders up until that point are so controlled. They're so calm, even though they're fueled by fear, hatred, anger, all of that stuff. They're in control of it, and that makes sense because that's part of the Sith code, right? Like that's part of the tenets of that path to the dark side is control of the Force, right? And it's one of the things that puts them on the path to the dark side is that ideology of like, oh, it's my power, like the dark side, like the Force is my power to wield as I see fit, right? um because control is one of the terms that's often used, like control, power, right? Like stuff like that when we're talking about sort of dark side tenets, right?
Mm.
um I'm thinking about like the lightsabers at Galaxy's Edge, right? Because I think that the dark side styles, because I think there are two of them, and I think that they are control and power. Because like that's the thing about the dark side, right? Like you look at like a Jedi like Soul or Qui-Gon, and they're tuned into the living Force, and that's very much about um allowing the Force to guide you, right? The things that Obi-Wan says to Luke when he's like, so it controls your actions, and he's like, partially, but it also obeys your commands. And Yoda kind of gets into ideas of like, yeah, like it it's like seductive, and it's easy and it's fast to go down the path of the dark side. It's a much more arduous journey on the path of the light, but it involves being quiet and listening, right? And like when your mind is
Good luck,
quiet,
Luke.
right? Yeah, like when you're calm and at peace, then you'll know the good side from the bad, right? um but with dark side Force users, it's very much about like not being calm and at peace. It's very much about subjugation of the Force, right? Um, yeah, so that it makes sense to me within the tenets of the dark side, specifically the Sith and the Sith code, that they would have that kind of control, right?
Mm.
That they would be able to mask their power level, right, in a very like Dragon Ball Z kind of way. um I because yeah, like and that's kind of the way that I've been thinking about it, is like very literally like Dragon Ball Z, where it's like I one of the things that is always really funny in Dragon Ball, is like a recurring thing, is that the all of like the Earth fight, like the Z fighters, everybody from Earth that has trained under like Master Roshi and Kami and whatever, like they all have the ability to mask their power levels,
Mm.
right? Like they don't exist at like a constant state of full power, right? So then whenever they encounter a new threat, like they meet Frieza for the first time, and like Frieza doesn't understand that, like, even Vegeta and Nappa, when they first show up, they're like, oh, these guys are weaklings, they'll be so easy to defeat. And then they start powering up and they're like, wait a second, like they were hiding this the whole time. They do that constantly on Dragon Ball, where it's like everybody underestimates the Earthlings, and then they're like, oh, here's our actual power, right? And you find out that like Krillin is actually like more powerful than most fighters in the universe, even though he's just this unassuming little bald short guy. So
I
I
like
like
that message.
yes, I and so yeah, I that same ideology, I think, is at play here, that these dark side users, like they're able to do that in a way that like the Jedi could, but why would they? They don't.
Mm.
They don't need to. They're not. They have nothing to hide, right?
Mm.
So they're not hiding their connection to the Force, but they could. They absolutely could. Luke does it, right? Like Luke does it in the Last Jedi. Rey is like, I sensed everything. I didn't sense you. Like, you're purposely cutting yourself off from the Force, right? And I think that's like that control, like that exercise. And it's funny, we're talking about this as a thing that dark side users would do, and then we're talking about Luke in the Last Jedi, and it's like his decisions, we know from the narrative, from that story, his decisions are wrong, right? Like he
Mm.
is on the wrong path. He's cut himself off out of fear, and fear, anger, hatred, and suffering, right? Like it's all in that. So him hiding on Octo is absolutely dark side. Like it's like that is him giving into the dark side. It's not him becoming a Sith. It's not him becoming a dark Jedi and going out and murdering people and seizing power and control and all of that sort of thing. But it is him acting out of fear and not acting in the way that a Jedi should, right? Um, but yeah, yeah. So that's it's interesting to look at these things and then go, like, how does this apply? How does this apply to these other instances? And it's like, yeah, there's Luke hiding himself from the Force, um, and acting in a very non-Jedi way, right? But Vernestra is hiding a myriad things, uh, and I think first and foremost that Kymir was her Padawan at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. And he says a long time ago.
A
It was
long
a
time
long
ago.
time ago. So
And now her presence in the story makes a lot more sense.
mm.
Why have this character from the old High Republic stuff, like from the like the stuff that's further back in time? She's the only one. And it's kind of like you kind of need that character there as that connection, but also to say that like she's been around for a long time, he's been around for a long time, but that it's like there's a reason why the rest of these Jedi wouldn't recognize Kymir, right? Why
Mm.
Soul doesn't recognize Kymir and whatnot. So I think that there's some dark side shenanigans going on there, and that Kymir is a lot older than he
Yeah.
appears to be.
Yeah.
I think that's the implication there for sure. Yeah, and Vernestra being over 100 years old sort of thing. Makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah, all that
Do
set up
we
so
think he
perfectly.
like unnaturally prolonged his life with the dark side, or
Yeah, I
you
think
know?
so. I
Okay.
think so. I
Yeah.
I think I think yeah, I think that he's using some sort of dark side power to do that.
Yeah, that's where
Um,
my head went to.
yeah, yeah, uh, uh, yeah, and it might even be like not like a Sith, or I mean, because he's not a Sith. I think that this week even further confirms the idea that he is not a Sith Lord. He's something else, right? And
He's reminding me of Maul, where he's just kind of he was, or at least he was on the path to be,
yeah,
and now he's just gonna be messing up the big plan. So
yeah, I think so.
Vanessa's gonna have to deal with him.
I think so as well, but I think that that's more in line with the fact that he was a Jedi and then has like walked away from that path to find another path, right? Because I mean, like the episode, I guess we're transitioning into talking about Chimera, I think at this point, but the episode is littered with musical references to Kylo Ren.
Mm,
When he gets out of the water, it's really like it's subtle, but it's also not subtle at all once you hear it. There's like a very like high pitched violin
mm,
playing Kylo Ren's theme, but like elongated. It's like stretched out. So it's like really high and it's really stretched out. And so you don't hear it until you kind of like hear it and then go back and listen. It's like absolutely that's what's happening there. Um and I went back, so I had some friends who weren't caught up and we were hanging out with them on Monday, and I was like, "Oh, you guys gotta get caught up. You guys gotta get caught up." I was like, "Well, then let's just watch it right now." So I like we had ordered food or whatever, and so we watched it. We watched the 2 episodes that they hadn't watched, 4 and 5. Watched them back to back, and
How
with
was that? Because I've been wanting to do that. I just didn't have time to.
very
Like,
good, very good.
pacing was like good.
Yeah, yeah,
Jumping
yeah,
from one to
yeah.
the other. Yeah.
Proper,
Okay.
proper. The way that it
Okay.
should have been presented for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I say that, but also at the same time, like I am loving, I'm savoring the slow burn of this series, like of us having like these pieces every week to like to sit and just like really
Yeah.
live in.
Nibble on.
um
Yeah.
yeah, I love it, I love it. But it was very enjoyable to watch the 2 episodes back to back. Very, very
Mm-hmm.
enjoyable to watch the 2 episodes back to back. But what I noticed in hindsight, going back and watching that first half, watching the fourth episode day, when Chimera is on screen throughout that entire episode, it in the music, in the score, it's constantly playing the first 2 notes of like 2 or 3 notes. I'm not a music expert, so I could be wrong on exactly how many notes it is, but like it's constantly playing the beginning, like it's teasing Kylo Ren's theme throughout, which to the audience at that point in time is just it's just it's a dark side motif, right? Like it's just like it's along the lines of the Imperial March, it's along the lines of the Emperor's theme, it's along the lines of all that stuff. It's minor, it's slow, it's foreboding, it's all of those things that we associate with the music of the dark side, right? But it's this like hidden statement, right? It's this like constantly like needling poking of like, hey, pay attention to him. He's not telling the whole truth. He hasn't revealed himself yet. He hasn't fully revealed himself yet. He's only showing part of himself. The music is doing that constantly. And then when he is revealed as the stranger, like when we see him, suddenly throughout that episode, we are getting Kylo Ren's theme constantly,
Mm.
and it's the most powerfully stated in that moment right before we talked about last week, right when he right before he heals her, when he kneels down and then heals her side, and then like covers her with the cloak. It's like we get like the full isolated statement of it, but it is played like interspersed like throughout and mixed under the rest of the music throughout the episode. It's constant. um and then this week's episode, it we heard it I think 3 times in the episode, in different ways, like in various ways, and like that one that I said that's like hidden, right? But if you watched all the way through to the end of the credits, the score is playing, and it's, you know, dark and foreboding, and it's you know, like what's going on, because obviously we're building towards this climax next week and the week after, with 2 episodes left. And then right at the end of the credits, it just fully plays Kylo Ren's theme, like like lifted from the Force Awakens,
Oh wow. Okay.
like just fully like Kylo Ren's theme. And yeah, like it there is nothing accidental about any of that. There's nothing like implied. This is not an implication, it's a statement, right? Like it's it's not subtext, it's text. We're
Yeah.
meant to hear it, we're meant to recognize it, and we're meant to draw a parallel and a connection between Kymir and Kylo Ren. It's at the point now where anybody who wants to argue about this facet of the character is being intellectually dishonest, because Leslie Headland is like slapping us in the face with it like a big wet fish. Like she could not be more explicit about the connection between these two fucking characters. It's like it's right there. So to me, like, I look at that, he is absolutely, until further notice, until we are given evidence to the contrary, as far as I am concerned, he is the first Ren, right? Like his path is going to create the Knights of Ren. I also think that like that what we're headed towards is Osha and May being his disciples, because the whole point of this series is not there. The resolution of this story will not be everybody having a happy ending and the bad guys being defeated.
Yeah.
Which I think that some people are kind of like they're on the wrong path right now. They're expecting that at some point this story is going to turn on its heel and we're going to head back towards a good guy resolution.
It's
This
not.
is
It's
this
not.
this series is not called the Padawan. It's not
Yeah.
called the Jedi Order. It's called the Acolyte, right? And it like that's what it's about. This is specifically about the dark side. It's specifically about I think it is specifically the origins of the Knights of Ren. And so yeah, I think that's where we're gonna end this. And I think that May is going to kill Soul. I think that we're gonna like it's going to lead us up to the precipice of us feeling like she's about to turn back to the light. And then let me clarify. I don't think she's going to kill Soul. I think that Soul is going to die. I think that she will fulfill that task that she's been given of killing a Jedi without a weapon. And that will be like her final step towards the dark side and towards becoming Kymir's acolyte. I think that we literally end the series in that final episode with the 3 of them together on Octo. That is clearly Octo. There's another planet that people are like throwing out that it could be because of the connection to Cortosis, because like in the EU lore there's like this or I don't know if it's EU, it might actually be something from canon, from like Disney, post Disney canon, but because I don't know the source of it, but I can't remember the name of the planet. I think I sent it to you yesterday, but yeah, like
I'll find it while you're doing it.
yeah, people are I throwing this out there as like, oh, here's all the evidence of like, you know, it's an ocean planet with these like rocky jungle islands, and rich deposits of cortosis. So that makes sense because he has cortosis, right?
Baldemnic.
Baldemnic, yeah. So
Baldemnic. Nick.
yeah,
Baldemnic, sure.
I uh, no, I don't think so. Because if it
Yeah,
was, we have gotten the names of all of the other planets, right? We get those chirons, we get those lower thirds of like, hey, we're back on Kofar. Even if we've already been to this planet, right? Like the only one that's not getting it repeatedly is Coruscant, because every time we go back to Coruscant, we know where we are, right?
although we did get it twice or 3 times. It was like, all right, we got it.
Yeah,
I think we
totally.
have this by now. But
Um, every other planet has been named. To say unknown planet specifically about this one planet that looks so strikingly like Octo, come on, get out of here. I had replied to a tweet last night that I can't remember who tweeted it, but somebody was talking about it, and I was like, no, absolutely, it's Octo. I think maybe it was Ty from Wit and Folly, but I was like or it might have been Marie Claire from What the Force, but I was like like no, you don't put unknown planet, you don't obfuscate it if it's not like tongue in cheek, like why bother? We haven't obfuscated any of the other planets' names, right? So like why obfuscate it if it's not Octo? Right, like it's very tongue-in-cheek, and it's very much like I said, like the lady doth protest too much, methinks, right? Like it's like the fact that we're making a big deal out of it means that it's a big deal,
yeah.
right? Like it is I think that Leslie Headland is absolutely saying it without saying it in order to make it more fun for us to sit there and go like, come on guys, that's clearly Octo. It's not the same island that Luke was on, but it is, to me, it is clearly Octo. Which we know that Octo is like, it's littered with islands. There are the whole planet is these like little rocky outcropping islands, right? So yeah, and what works for me with that is that we're meant to infer from The Last Jedi that Octo is the birthplace of the Jedi Order, right? It's the beginning of it, and that the Prime Jedi of Mosaic, right, the one that's both light and dark, is like that implication that like this predates Jedi Sith, right? That Octo predates the Jedi and the Sith, that it's been there since before the Jedi Sith War. So it would make sense to me that like if that's the birthplace of the Jedi, and we've got this temple and settlement that Luke is in, connecting to the Force, and or presumably at one point connecting to the Force, but then shutting himself off, and like in his hermitage or whatever, they at some point in time on that planet the split occurs, right? And we end up with the Jedi on one side of it and the Sith on the other side of it, and there would then be Jedi settlements and Sith settlements, right? And that Chimere is in a place of dark side power, I and like somewhere else on the planet, somewhere else on Octo. But that's like, to me, like that makes a lot of sense. That like that's what he would seek out. I is a place like that, in order to, yeah, train and become more powerful and learn about the dark side and all of that sort of thing. Yeah. So to me, it's absolutely Octo. 1,000%, it's Octo. It just it's a thing of like, yeah, it looks different. There are some different components to it, but we only ever saw one location on Octo,
Right.
right? It's like we only ever saw two places on Tatooine in Return of the Jedi, right, in A New Hope, right? And then in Return of the Jedi, we go out into the dunes and we see the Sarlacc, and it's like to say that like, well, we never saw a Sarlacc in A New Hope, so how could that be Tatooine? And then to go to the Phantom Menace and to go to Mos Espa and to go into like, the flats and like all like the pod race course. It's like we see all sorts of aspects of Tatooine that we didn't see in its previous two appearances in the original trilogy, right? So it's like the more we see of a planet, the more diverse we see that planet to be, right? But people I find get really hung up on that stuff
Mm.
because of the way that George structured it in the original trilogy, right? Of like, oh, this is a desert planet, this is an ice planet, this is a jungle planet, this is a forest moon, right? Like this is Cloud City, like it's all um like they're monolithic biomes. It's like it's all one thing. But anytime that we've revisited and gone to like a different area of a world, it's like, oh, it is more diverse. It's still all desert, right? Like Tatooine is still all desert, but there's room to say, you know, there was this and that. And it's like we see very little life on Tatooine in the movies, and then all of a sudden in Mandalorian, it's like we see a crate dragon and the thing is massive, and then in Obi-Wan we see a giant sand ray, right? Like this other creature, and it's all tied into the fact that at one point in time the planet was covered in water, right? Like I so yeah, like there it what I'm saying, the point that I'm getting at is like give yourself room for there to be like more opportunity in these
Mm.
locations, right? Like open yourself up to the possibility of these planets being more diverse than the first time that we've ever seen it,
Right.
right? I yeah, because it's like because the idea behind the biome like these monobiome planets was iconography, right? It was so that he could like clearly communicate like, you know, this environment versus that environment, this location versus that location, right? And cut back and forth quickly. Like that's why George did that. And like that's only important in so much as it serves the story, and then when the story needs to do something else, it does something else, right? So yeah, these hot spring waterfall things or whatever that Chimera is bathing in, it's like, yeah, just allow it, like allow it to be on Octo. It's a different part of the planet. It's a
Mm.
different location that has this one thing. There's nothing there to me that's like that says this can't be Octo, you know what I
Mm.
mean?
Yeah.
um and then the little creatures, they have a name. Let me get it right.
The not porgs.
Yeah, the Skura, they're called Skura. They're like they're meant to be part anteater, part duck. That was like
Ah.
the design, the design note, right? But they are very clearly Thala Siren-esque, right? Like they're not, obviously not the same species as a thalassiren, which is like this big thing, but in the way that we have whales and we have dolphins, they are very similar. They are very connected,
Mm.
right? Evolutionarily. So I look at that and I go like, well, those look like creatures that would live on Octo. They're small like porgs, but they've got the snout like a thalassiren. They have the coloring of a thalassiren, the webbed feet and everything. Like there's a lot more to connect it to Octo than to say that this is a completely new environment, right?
Mm.
So if you think of it in that way of like, well, these are just new creatures on that same planet. It's like how everything on Tatooine is kind of, you know, they're fairly connected. Everything aesthetically is fairly connected. Um, so yeah, like it I don't know. It makes sense to me. Like I look at it, it's absolutely Octo. It's
Mm.
absolutely Octo to me. Again, until further notice. So,
Right. Yeah.
um, what do you think? Do you have anything to say
I don't
on
really have
that
an
note?
opinion on if it's Octo or not. I mean, it immediately felt like it. So
Mm-hmm.
you know, I was thrown off by the unknown planet. I was like, oh, okay, so it's just a place that um looks like Octo, and I felt like I was like, there's probably significance to that, but you know, if
Yeah,
we're not supposed to know it's Octo yet, I'm not really too worried about it. But like, my head did go there, and I mean, it's not that I don't care. I just felt like, all right, well, this isn't super important right now
Yeah,
where
yeah,
we
yeah.
are. Like, if it's important, we'll probably find out later. So I honestly don't really have an opinion on it right now.
So I think it's important in so much as it's connected to the whole Raylo aspect of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because the other thing that I want to talk about is that very fact that like the Kylo Ren connections for Chimere are numerous and pointed, right? Like it's
Mm.
very in your face. Osha and Ray are connected, but not in as direct a way, I don't think.
Okay.
Because I think Osha is a very different character from Ray, but there was a visual language in this episode that that is absolutely meant to connect those two characters in our minds, right? I So it's interesting. When we met her, she was dressed as a neutral character. She was very much in the colors that we would expect to see from a Han or a Lando or Rose or any of those sort of like more like sort of slightly on the outside of the force, like the battle between the dark side and the light side, right?
Mm.
These characters that get pulled in to the fight. As a matter of fact, like the colors are closer to Boba Fett than they are to anything else, because she's got that sort of green that jumpsuit, right? Like her mech neck
Mm.
jumpsuit is very like, it's very Boba Fett colored with the vest and everything. Like there's a lot more connection there into sort of like the I don't want to say like mercenary side of things, but that's how we kind of used to talk about it, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
the underworldy,
yeah,
smugglery.
yeah.
Yeah,
But I think like more on the neutral side, more on like the civilian side, right?
sure,
Like the
sure.
sort of the galactic citizen side of it.
Mm.
But very much of the like I look at it very much like similar to Rose, right? I of the like this, she's a good person, she is on the good side, but and she's also not like, when we see sort of like citizens of the galaxy, we tend to either be looking at like, you know uh dirty people on Tatooine, or like highfalutin people on Coruscant, right?
Right.
Or Canto Bight. Like those are sort of the ways that the galaxy is presented to us, outside of like our heroes, right? But she's presented initially in very much that like Han Solo, Dash Rendar, Lando Calrissian sort
Mm.
of color scheme of like, colors but not like colorful. Actually, I guess we take Lando out of that. Lando's very colorful, but I then she transitions into the white, right? The civilian robe that she's made to wear by the Jedi. But she protests it, right? Like her whole
Mm.
thing is like, okay, but I'm not wearing the civilian robes. And then we see her in it and she's like grumpy about it, because she's not comfortable. That's not her, right? And then she wakes up and she's in this tank top and basically like yoga pants,
Yeah.
right? And barefoot, and but there are these clothes there that are like, let's say they're presumably May's, right? Like those are because we saw May on this planet at the beginning of the series,
Mm.
with Chimere. So presumably this is where they have been doing their training. So that's May's training clothes, right? But she puts them on, and now she's gray, right? Dark gray, but gray, right? Like very much somewhere between the dark and the light,
Mm.
but sort of leaning more towards the dark. But the cut and the style of it is so Ray coded, like, listen, what's the one thing that is consistent throughout all of Ray's costumes, right? There are two design components that scream Ray. exposed shoulders, and the wrap, right? Like her single wrap tabard, right?
Yeah.
Like the Jedi have two that crisscross, but Rey's is one single thing that loops, right? Like that's sort of like her signature thing. And no matter which version of like which of her outfits throughout, except for her vest one, right? Where she's meant to look more like Han Solo for some reason. Although that's my favorite outfit of hers, I should say. But color wise, like that one's very much what we see here, with May. Sorry, with Osha. But yeah, like that, the hoodie that she puts on, this like crop top hoodie, has the cuts with the exposed shoulders, and then it's got the hood, and the boots are not, they're not like exactly like Rey's boots, but they're like in terms of silhouette, like in terms of like that sort of like mid calf, very like clean silhouette of the boot. Like it's very very much the style of what Rey would wear. So I look at that character and it's like we are meant to look at these two characters of Osha and Kymir and see Rey and Ben Solo, see Rey and Kylo Ren. It's it and that is to like this is shorthand, right? Like this is to get us very quickly to the idea that there is some sort of a spark between these two, right? And I think that Kymir is playing into that. I think that he is manipulating it and using it. I don't think that Kymir is, I don't think he's unattracted to Osha. I mean, she's hot, right? Like it's kind of the whole point. Um I but I don't think that he's like in the way that Kylo Ren was very like called to Rey, right? Like there was something deeper there. But yeah, like there is an aspect there of like he's using the connection between them and the tension, the sexual tension, as a way to inch her closer and closer towards desire. Like he calls it out, right? Like it's like one of the great things about this show is that like there's very little subtext. The characters are telling us what's going on. We just have to listen. You just have to actually be paying attention. And he calls it out because like she's like those are dark side things, and he's like, yeah, okay, like this, that, the other thing, desire. And it's like he's goading her into it, and he's leading her on, and he's very much like forcing the sexual tension between the two of them, because I think that he sees it as an opportunity to get her on to his side. And then I think it can develop from there, right? Like I think that there's room for that relationship to be more than that. But there's also the component, again, he calls it out, because she kind of says like, is that, like, is that what you told May, is that what you said to May? And he goes like, like I made some mistakes with May. And I think that what he is saying there is like he kept her at a distance, right? Like I think that he approached the master pupil relationship in
Are
the
we
way
talking
that
about Osha or May?
we're talking about May now. I think
Oh,
like,
okay.
because Osha says that to him, and he says, I made some mistakes with May, right?
Okay.
And I think that like he tried to take May on as a pupil, as a student, in the way that the Jedi take Padawans,
Right. Okay.
right? Because it's all he knew. So that's what he was emulating with that. But he tried to do it in like this dark side way of like not revealing himself and all of this deceit and that sort of thing. But that he is trying a different approach with Osha. I think like that's the point of it, is that we're like, what that implies is like there was like this weird distance that he put between himself and May.
Right.
He's doing the opposite with Osha. He is going to pull her in as close as possible, because that seduction, that her desire to be something special, is what he's capitalizing on, right? And I think that there's room there in that story for that to also kind of be his downfall to a certain degree, of like that's where it starts, that's where like the flirtation between them starts, but then it can grow into something else, right? For those that are shipping these two characters. But of course, you can ship two characters and it can never end up being something romantic. It can just be purely lustful. It can be carnal, right?
Mm.
Like you can just want the two characters to have sex. Like that's shipping as well. So it depends. Like I don't know what perspective everybody has on this. For me, it is very much like I like the interplay between these two characters. I'm very curious to see how that's going to work when May gets thrown back into the mix, and what the three of them would look like together. But I mean, honestly, I think that's where we're driving. I
Mm.
think that's what it's gonna be in the end. Um, but yeah, I love it. I'm loving it because this idea of the dark side, this temptation of the dark side, being a literal seduction towards the dark side, like and that we're playing with these enemies to lovers tropes as a path towards Osha falling to the dark side. Like that to me is very interesting because it's so different from what we've gotten in the past with Star Wars, right?
Mm.
Like the dark side paths that we've seen in the past, they all have to do with power. They all have to do um being able to achieve something that they couldn't achieve without the dark side, right? It's always been ambition. With Dooku, it was like, well, you know, the Jedi are falling, you know, into disarray, and you know they're on the wrong path. They won't listen to you, but if you follow me, like Palpatine's saying, is like, if you follow me, like I'll teach you a way, you know, that you can basically like show the Jedi that they're wrong, right?
Mm.
So it's like that ambition that pulls him in. With Ventress, it's very much like it's survival, but it's very much a power thing as well. Of like, no one will ever hurt you again if you hurt them first,
Mm.
right? Uh, and with Maul, it was very straightforward. Maul was just a part of the plan. Like he was, it was very much, you know, Palpatine's plan to take over the galaxy, and it was revenge, and so that's a lot of ambition stuff. And then that's what Vader appeals to with Luke as well, right? Is like, is power and ambition. If the two of us together will be powerful enough to destroy the Emperor, and then we can rule the galaxy however we want, right? So he's like, he's trying to like to get Luke on his side in that way. And we don't need to get into why Vader falls to the dark side. That's all.
Mm.
There's entire movies about it. That one's academic. So it's like, but that's what we've seen, right? And with Kylo Ren, it's a little bit different. But at the end of the day, it like it is that is about power. That is about like about. I mean, like Kylo Ren says it, right? Like, I'll show them the power of the dark side, that sort of thing, right? Like, um, but that's in rebellion. Like his is in it's a little bit different because his is in response to an expectation that was placed on him, and when he fell short of that expectation, that was his path to the dark side. Snoke took advantage of that, but at the end of the day, it was very much like, show them, prove them wrong, right? Like, prove them wrong that you know, they all think that there's something wrong with you, but you could be the most powerful force user in the galaxy if you follow me, sort of thing. So again, it's all power. But with this, like, this has nothing to do with power. It's about Kymir's whole thing is he has the power, but he doesn't have the freedom to use it in the way that he wants to. And so that's like, he's I think he's putting Osha on the same path of like, unlock your power. Now that you have your power unlocked, the Jedi are going to try and take this from you. They're going to try and stop you again. They're going to erase your memories. They're going to block your ability because they're afraid of you. Like, you're already powerful. You already have that. That's not the temptation to the dark side. The temptation to the dark side is the freedom to use it however you want, right? And that goes into the control thing. It's like, he won't be controlled, she won't be controlled, the Jedi tried to control them, which was a dark side thing, which was a bad thing, which has led to this, right? It's all interconnected in that way, I think.
Mhm.
Any thoughts? Any thoughts?
I mean, it makes sense, right? Like it's I have so little to say about this episode because
Yeah.
it really just was a lot of okay, we're moving the chess pieces around right now, right?
Yeah.
I feel like leaning any direction either way with this because you and I are very rarely on the same page about like, oh, this is totally going to be in a romance direction. Like
Yeah.
I feel like we never agree. This one, it's not that I disagree. I just don't know how I don't know if it's one-sided or not yet. Like I don't know that Chimere is actually like I believe he wants a pupil, but to me I just feel like he just wants someone to manipulate. Like he's a bad guy, right? He's a dark side user. He just wants someone to use for his own purposes. I don't know that it's a type of Raylo connection because I really feel like Kylo Ren at the time wanted. I really felt like he really genuinely wanted Rey to like be his equal and for them to rule
Yeah.
together and do
Yeah.
whatever. I don't get that with Chimere. I mean, maybe it's there, maybe it's not. I just feel like it's too early to tell. So I almost feel I'm not saying you're wrong to
Yeah.
you know, feel the way you feel or to you know, speculate on it, but I don't know. I just feel like not enough is there for me to make up my mind yet. It's just kind of
Yeah.
like, yeah, okay, it could be, but I don't know yet.
I think the difference, this is the great thing, and everybody's kind of been talking about this and discussing this on Twitter. The great thing is that the parallels are there between
Mm-hmm.
Rey and Kylo and Osha and Chimere. The rhyming is there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not a duplication. This isn't Raylo 2.0. This is its own thing. Like Oshmir is its own thing. And I think also it's incomplete because I think that May is also part of it. But I think what's happening here, like the biggest difference, and what you're keying into is that Rey and Kylo, the connection was there because they were already a dyad,
Mm-hmm.
right? Before they even knew each other, and the Rise of Kylo Ren comic is the confirmation of this. Before they ever even knew one another existed, they were connected in the Force.
Mm-hmm.
Snoke just like Palpatine via Snoke just enhanced the connection. He just like he tuned it so that they could communicate with each other through the Force, right? They were already a dyad, that it already existed. And I think that the implication is that like this could have happened multiple times throughout the history of Star Wars. But if those two characters are never brought together, if the circumstances aren't right, then the dyad is never like realized, right? But that these connections in the Force exist between people. I think that there's a very specific line in this episode where Chimera says, because she's like, "What do you want? Like, what are you after?" And he specifically says, "The power of two,"
Mm-hmm.
which is a reference back to the earlier episode, to the third episode, right? It like it's a reference to that because it's the power of one, the power of two, the power of many was the whole like that coven's thing. I think that coven is specifically dedicated to the dyad, whether they know that or not, whether whether the way that they refer to it is the same thing as what Palpatine and Kylo Ren are referring to in Rise of Skywalker, whatever. His language when he says the power of two is also a reference to Rise of Skywalker in what Palpatine says, because Palpatine, like he's got the two of them in front of him and he goes to shoot them with lightning and it bounces back on him and he's able to absorb their energy, right? And then he goes like well, you've come together, like the power of two restores the one true emperor, right? But he refers to it specifically as the power of two, the dyad as the power of two. um and that's what Chimera says that he's after. So I think like Chimera not having a full understanding of what the dyad is, that the dyad is a natural occurrence in the Force, right? They he is trying to force it. He's trying to create that dynamic.
Mm.
And I think that's informed by the rule of two. I think that like he's studied the Sith. He is not a Sith because the line of the Sith is something that has continued, like like it's unbroken since the time of Bane, right?
Mm.
Like that's the implication that we get in like Plagueis and all of that, is that like they've been biding their time, and they've been like leapfrogging master and apprentice, master and apprentice, master and apprentice through the millennia, in order to bide their time and eventually overthrow the Jedi once the balance of power shifts, which is what Vernestra says. But like Chimera is outside of that, right? Like he's forging his own path again. I think this is the stuff that's implying and leading towards him being the first Ren, right? um Again, why have him call out that he has no name if not for him to take a name by the end of this story, right? um but the dyad is present in this story, and it's going to be a realization that I think that he comes to, that the three of them come to when Osha and May are reunited in the final episode. Because they are a dyad, and I think that the Coven specifically created them to be a dyad. And that the component of that is exactly like it's the component of Rey and Kylo. Both of them, darkness rises and light to meet it, right? That's is what Snoke says.
Mm.
Like they are the balance, and when they come together in the Last Jedi, in that moment, Kylo Ren does not become Ben Solo in that moment. He doesn't return to the light side, right? Like, and Rey doesn't fall to the dark side in order to join him. The two of them just come together in balance to work towards the goal of restoring balance to the Force, right? And then Kylo Ren makes his own choices and disrupts that balance, because it is a constant choice. Like the Force is giving opportunities, but the individuals have to take those opportunities. It controls your actions, but it also listens to your commands, right? Like it's both. It's not that simple, and it's not fate, it's not destiny, it's there's free will involved in it. But like these two, May and Osha, are they are the dyad, they are the power of two, but the three of them together are the power of many, right? And I think like that's what we're going to get to at the end of this, is that is that the three of them was the power of many, and that we're going to discover that's why the Knights of Ren are a gang. That's why there's multiples of them, and there will always be a Ren at the head of it. Like Chimera will be the leader of these two, and he's teaching them and training them. But that like Ren has followers. Like that's like that idea is born out of this, and it's going to come out of like the whole power of many thing. And that the three of them together are going to be able to do whatever they want, right? And so they're just basically like, because the Knights of Ren are basically like a dark side biker gang, right? Like that's kind of what they are. And if you look at it that way, of like, okay, so like they're not, they won't be a direct threat to the Jedi. Like I think what we're going to end up seeing is them going like, at the end of this series, like, we did it. Everybody who knows that we exist is gone. I think possibly Vernestra will know that they're there, and I think that she might be like, listen, go, go, stay away from the core worlds, stay away from my business. I have things that have been like, I'm working on things that have been put in place over the last 1,000 years. You won't wreck that. If you come back, I'll destroy all three of you. You can't stop me, right? But everybody else thinks that, like, I'll go back. I'll tell them that you're dead. You guys are free to go do whatever you want somewhere else in the galaxy, but stay out of my business, because I have a plan in order to defeat the Jedi, right? And like that'll be like the end of the series, like because one of the other things that we haven't talked about Leslie Headland has said this is intended to be a complete story. There is no season 2 planned
Right.
for this.
Yeah.
Like this is going to resolve itself. And at first when I heard that last week, I was like, no, because like how are we gonna resolve anything with everything the way that it's going? Like these characters are geared to fall to the dark side. How do we resolve that? And then I remembered what I said earlier is like, oh, that's the point of the show. The point of the show is not this isn't the original trilogy. This is the prequel trilogy, right? It's like saying that Revenge of the Sith has no resolution because at the end of it, Anakin has fallen to the dark side and become Darth Vader. It's like no, that is the resolution. That was the point. Is that the point of the prequels was for Palpatine to rise to power, and for Anakin to become Darth Vader. That is the resolution of the story, right? And then obviously it continues on. So she has said like she has more stories to tell, but that this story is meant to wrap itself up in this one season, like the story of the Acolyte. So I do think that like that's what we're driving at, that this is going to it's going to resolve itself, but the resolution is not going to be that the good guys win. The resolution is that the bad guys have won and we're one step closer to the fall of the Jedi, right? um so yeah, I like that. That's what I'm driving at. And so in terms of like the shipping thing, it's like shipping is not necessarily romantic. It's also not necessarily like when you ship two characters together, it's not necessarily saying that that's the way that the actual canon story needs to go. It's just to say that there's a spark between these two characters, or a connection between these two characters that people would like to see
Mhm.
explored. And so, writing fanfic and stuff like that is not, it can be like there is fix it fanfic, and the purpose of a fix it fanfic is to say that like the story didn't go the way that I wanted it to, and so here is a fanfic that corrects the story from my point of view, which is fine. Like I think that that's totally legit as a fan. But that's you're just telling what if stories, right? That's all you're doing. They're just alternate realities, alternate timelines. But there are also fix like shipping fix that are it's literally just these two characters are hot together, right? And so it's just like it's just an exploration of that component of the characters. um and that is also totally valid, because it's like they're this all fake, and the reason why we tell stories is just to explore things about ourselves, to uncover things about humanity, right? That's the whole purpose of it. So like to that end, canon is irrelevant, right? Story is king. Story is the most important thing. Canon is a tool to tell stories over a long term, but it's not. If it gets in the way of your story, then break it, right? Like fix it, change it. It doesn't matter. Retcon something. Like what difference does it make? Tell a good story. But I look at it and I go like, okay, so there is a connection, there's a tension here. I don't think that Kymir is romantically attracted to Osha. I think that Kymir is using Osha's repression against her, right? The fact that she was raised by the Jedi to become a Jedi and then cast aside by them because they were afraid of her power. From his perspective, that's what he's presenting. He's looking at that and he's going like what's the least Jedi thing to do here? The least Jedi thing to do here is for me to manipulate her sexually, right? Like for me to use my physical appearance to get her to do what I want her to do,
Mm.
right? And so he's using that to his advantage. And it's not to say that should the opportunity arise, I think that he absolutely would have sex with Osha, right? Like
Mm.
I think like if that's where it led to, he would do that. But I think he would do that to the end of his own satisfaction, his own pleasure, and also his like exerting his control over her, right? Like his dominance, right? So we're getting into like BDSM terminology here, because like that's the dynamic that's going on here. Like and that's what that's about, is like power dynamic, right? That's what people respond to in terms of that stuff. So like that power dynamic is what he's using. He's using the power dynamic between the two of them, and he's actually like, I. He's topping from the bottom, right? Like that's what he's doing because he's like, yeah, take the lightsaber, point it at me, do it, right? He's giving her all of the instructions, but he's putting her in the dominant role the entire time. And that to me is, I think, what's really interesting about it, because it's this isn't romantic. What I'm talking about is not romantic stuff. It can be in a dynamic, but in this specific instance, it's not romantic. He is literally just using power dynamics, and some of that is sexually charged in this instance because the Acolyte is a horny show. So but like it makes sense, right? Like it makes sense in terms of like the seduction. This is stuff that we've talked about with like Ventress as a character, and like the way that she flirts with Obi-Wan and that sort of thing. There is like the term seduction has been used to refer to the dark side in a more general sense in the past, but like it's being used in a very literal way here, that like I mean, stepping out of the water completely naked. It's taking that thing that happened with Kylo and Rey, that was toying with the idea of this sexual attraction between these two, that was an implication of a deeper connection between the two of them, right? But it's taking that idea and it's playing with that and it's moving it to the next level, where he is like, everything that he says to her in this episode, he's like, like, if you're not going to join me, then I'd like to put my clothes back on, right? And it's like he's inviting her in that moment of like, get naked and get in the water with me, right? But he's doing it in order to toy with her,
Yeah.
along the lines of what Yord said in the last episode. He gets inside your head and he stays there. And then he says in this episode, he's like, I'm not using the Force. This isn't a magic power. You're giving off these vibes and I'm just telling you about it, right? Like your feelings betray you, right? Like you're like he's basically saying to her, by saying the things that he's saying, he's like, I can tell that you're conflicted right now because you look at me and you are attracted to me, and I'm using that to basically confuse what you're feeling. Because if she trusted herself, I think that, like, I think Osha would go back to and fall back to her Jedi teachings, right? If she trusted herself. She doesn't trust herself for good reason, because the Jedi have messed with her memories, and so there's something deep inside that she's like, I don't trust myself. The Jedi have told me not to trust myself. They've told me to be afraid of my power. And he's using that. And he's using the sexual tension between the two of them as a way to put her off balance, so that he can then, it's all the goal is to get her to put the helmet on, right? Ultimately, you put the helmet on, and then she's gonna go into the Force, and she's gonna, you know he knows more than she does. Somehow he knows, and we'll find out next week, I think, why he knows what happened. But it's all, the whole goal of this episode, everything that he does is to move her closer and closer and closer towards that end of like, put the helmet on. Like even him fiddling with it at the end, towards the end, right? Him like repairing it, right? And I'm using like quote fingers there, because that's like, I don't think that there's anything for him to repair. I don't think that he's doing anything meaningful to the helmet. I think that he is fiddling with it while she eats in order to, again, move her towards it. He's just like laying out breadcrumbs. So then she starts talking about the helmet, and then he tells her what it does. It's like, this is why I wear it. It's like it blocks everything out, so all there is the Force. I can't see, I can't hear, I can't smell, right? It gets rid of all of my other senses so that I am just trusting in the Force, which is great, because that's a sideways reference to Kanan in Star Wars Rebels, right? Once he's blinded, and it's like, yeah, well, without this, then I just need to rely on the Force and tune into that. and he becomes an even better Jedi than he was before, as a result. But here's this other way of presenting it, this other character from this other perspective, but it's the same thing, right? It rhymes, right? Like that's the whole thing. But yeah, like everything that Chimere does in this episode is towards the goal of having Osha put that helmet on. And I love it. It could like he does it in the perfect tempting way of like, you here, come try it on. And she's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then he goes, okay, whatever. It's there for you if you want it. And then he leaves the room. Right. It's just to leave her with it, because if he forces it, if he pushes the subject, like, no, put it on, come put it on. No, I'm telling you, come put it on. You have to come put it on. It's so similar to like, the ship is right there. If you want it, like, you better start swimming now if you want to reach it before sundown. Like, or you could just wait for the tide to go out. He's like, you're not a prisoner. I'm not keeping you here. If you want to leave, you can leave. There are ways for you to leave. But then he was like, but I'm hungry, so I'm gonna go. And you must be hungry too, so I'm gonna go make some food. And it's like just everything that he does is like, he it's an illusion of choice, right? He keeps presenting her with opportunities of like, you can go, you can do this, you can kill me, right? Knowing that she's going to do the other thing. So, but constantly making her think that she's in control. Again, this is like that topping from the bottom thing. Like he is pretending that he is not in control of the situation, but everything that he's doing is to manipulate her. So yeah, that's my interpretation of it, at least, and other people might not see it that way, but I see it, I'm like, yeah. And kind of knowing Leslie Headland and the things that she talks about and the things that she's put into her stuff, like, she's very much open about that sort of sexual stuff. And yeah, it's I think very much like these dynamics are at play, these power dynamics, and it makes sense because that stuff is very connected into ideologies of the dark side, and iconography are more important than like anything in universe. Our own biases towards like how we see things like BDSM and kink and that sort of thing, right? Like, we still people refer to it as deviant behavior, right? When if you talk to somebody about it, they would be like, it's just an acceptance of a you know sort of like animalistic, like base parts of human nature, right? So it's like a lot of that lends itself into conversations about the dark side. Right? There's so much of it that's connected into the dark side. I guarantee you that those are the conversations that Leslie Headland was having with people when she was coming up with this Star Wars story, was like those connections of like how we like how a puritanical society looks at things like that, looks at sexuality, like full stop sexuality, right? Just sex, full stop, as deviant, right? As bad, right? That's the entire purpose of puritanical thought, is that like, oh, all of this is sin, all of this is of the devil, of the dark side, right? And North American society, Western society, I mean, like like America and Canada are very much founded on puritanical ideologies, and it's baked into our laws, it's baked into our moral codes and ethics, it's baked into everything. When it's like, it's very restrictive, it's very much about like putting guardrails and rules around things that don't need to have rules. Because like, whatever, two consenting adults, whatever, right? Like it's nobody's business. And that's tied into like LGBTQ rights and stuff like that, of like, other people look at that as deviant behavior, and so like, I think that those parallels are there. I think so much of the stuff that we talk about in Star Wars as subtext in this series is not subtext, it is the text, because I think the subtext is the stuff that I'm talking about right now, right? Like the Jedi represent and are tied to very closely in this series, and very closely in the prequels, the government, politics, right? And So like the idea of the Jedi being puritanical, no one can exercise, like these ideologies of the Force without our permission, and it's only the ones that we deem worthy. So like, you guys are doing dark side stuff, so we say that you can't do it, right? That's very Catholic, like that's very churchy, right? Like that's very like Christian evangelical sort of, I puritanical stuff. It's you know that, like that, and that's that's a lot of the stuff that's like informing our modern day politics, is that puritanical Christian ideology. So it's like that's intrinsically tied into the role of the Jedi in the Republic, um and it's also their downfall, right? Like it's that rigidity that leads to them being unaware of the dark side, and the rise of the dark side, and all of that, right? And their corruption is tied to their reliance on the Republic, on political power, and all of that sort of stuff. So like, to me, that's the subtext of the series, and that's all like tied into uh like civil rights stuff and human rights, LGBTQ rights, all of that stuff is tied into the stuff that's being talked about here. So the fun thing about that is that it puts us with Chimere and the dark side, and what I'm saying is going to be the Knights of Ren. It puts us much people with liberal ideologies much more in line with that than with the Jedi,
Mm.
right? But the other component of that is that we have Jedi who actually like exemplify what that looks like for the Jedi, characters like Qui-Gon, right? Because Qui-Gon's very much like, this council is bogus, your decisions are bogus, I don't care, I will train him, I will take him on as a Padawan. And I think like it's funny because we have all of these like what ifs that people have done over the years, and like ideas that people have of like, well, what if Qui-Gon doesn't die and he does take on Anakin? uh, I think that if Qui-Gon doesn't die, the council doesn't make the decision to let Anakin train. I think that if Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan defeat Maul, or let's say that it reverses in some way, Obi-Wan dies, Qui-Gon survives, Maul is defeated, they come out of that, and Qui-Gon is like, listen, that was a Sith Lord, 1,000%. He killed my Padawan. You guys are turning your, like, putting, like, burying your heads in the sand. Ki-Adi-Mundi's over here saying like the Sith don't exist. I just fought one. He killed my Padawan. You guys aren't letting me train Anakin. I'm done. I'm leaving the Jedi Order. Like the Jedi Order is clearly, like, there's something going on here.
Mm.
The dark side is everywhere, and you guys are completely oblivious to it. I'm gonna go figure this out on my own, and I'm leaving the Jedi Order, which he would absolutely do because his master did before him,
Mm.
right? So it's like I look at Qui-Gon, and I look at Qui-Gon as a Jedi who would absolutely, you know, be for LGBTQ rights and all of that sort of thing. He'd be out there marching with BLM, right? Whereas I look at Obi-Wan, and it's like, maybe not as much. Obi-Wan's kind of a rule follower, right? Like especially like prequel Clone Wars Obi-Wan, very much, right?
Yeah.
Very much like you know well, the protests need to be peaceful, guys, right? Like that sort of a thing. And you guys know I love Obi-Wan, but he is a flawed character in the prequels. He has to be in order for it to happen, right? But then the Obi-Wan that we meet in A New Hope, I think, is very much like he's learned from the errors of his ways, and and that Obi-Wan would very much be like, oh yeah, absolutely, like, I but yeah, anyways, it's fun to look at it. It's fun to look at the subtext of what's going on here and the connections, and then to go like with the real world stuff and go like, oh, like Leslie Headland is kind of saying that the dark side is right, but that's what's fun about it, because it's like, it's really easy for us to go like, oh, the dark side is right.
Mm.
Right? It's I when we're watching X-Men 97, Magneto, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
Magneto's right? Like I think that's what she's playing with. And in Star Wars, it's interesting because the lines are so clear, right? The white hats and the black hats are so clear. And George Lucas did that on purpose to make it easy for kids. But then, like, as adults, to people say, like, oh, I want mature Star Wars, or I want mature Star Wars. And then they see Andor and they go, this is what I'm talking about. They see Rogue One and they go, oh, that's what I want. And it's like, I would say, like, Acolyte is actually the most mature Star Wars story that we've gotten, because I think Acolyte is actually using Star Wars and the tropes of Star Wars to explore some real stuff
Yeah.
and difficult stuff. Andor's also doing that, but I think Andor is preaching, very much preaching to the choir, right? Like, it's very much like turning to people and going like, hey, don't you think authoritarian police states are bad? And it's like, yeah, of course we do, right? It's like, hey, isn't fascism a gross thing? And it's like, yeah, yes. Why are we laboring the point though? Right? Like, why are we spending 12 episodes in the first season to get to the point of the Imperials are bad guys, you guys?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, we're aware. We're all aware. Like, you're not like, I don't think that Andor is revealing anything true about society, right? I think that what Andor is doing is trying to say to us, like, hey, wake up, right? But it doesn't, for me, it kind of doesn't work because the Empire are the bad guys. They're already the bad guys. We know that they're the bad guys. They have stormtroopers. They're space Nazis. They're run by two evil space wizards, right? Like, we know that they're the bad guys. A more interesting story to me in terms of Star Wars along those lines is what we're seeing in the Mando stuff when we get that one episode about Dr. Pershing, right? Where it's like, oh, the Republic's just as bad as the Empire was. They're pretending that they're this democratic thing, but at the end of the day, it's like they're using the same tactics. They're just they just give it different names, right? They're just sort of like tweaking it, but they're still being very fascistic with it. Like, the way that they're treating the Imperials and like these re-education camps and stuff like that is like, it's weird, it's icky, right? That to me is so much more interesting than saying, like, hey, this prison, the Imperials are using prisons to manufacture the Death Star. It's like, yeah, yes, of course they are. Like, that's not a reveal. I was saying that to those friends, like, it was Curtis, like, who does I did Pullbox podcast and who does Epic Marvel podcast. He's been on all of the ThunderQuack stuff. We were talking about Rogue One, and I said that of like, the reveal at the end of not Rogue One, of Andor. It's like the twist, the big twist reveal at the end of the season that all of the cogs that they were building are parts of the Death Star. That there's no twist there. That's, of course, like, you would have to not be paying attention to Star Wars to be like, I wonder what they're building. I wonder why they're being put under so much pressure to produce all of this stuff. I wonder what it could be. This story that's connected to Rogue One. I wonder, what are they building? It's obviously they're building the Death Star. There's no reveal there. There's nothing surprising about that. I'm not, that's not a problem for me. It's just, when people talk about that, because I've heard people online be like, yeah, man, that reveal at the end. It's like, what reveal? There's no reveal there. It's a cool image. I love the imagery of it, right? When we see the pieces of the Death Star like pulled apart or whatever, and we see like those spider robots and they're like welding together these components. To me, it was like, it's not a reveal. It was just see this is where those pieces are. So the next time you're watching A New Hope, you can go like, oh, they were building the parts of the reflector dish, right? Like, that's what they were building. Cool. It's an Easter egg, not a reveal. But anyways, yeah. I think that's it. I think that's all I have to say about this episode of The Acolyte.
I have to say,
yeah,
I'm very impressed that, for the most part, and arguably, we stayed on topic today. And by we, I mean you.
Yeah.
We did it. We actually talked about the episode itself. And
you know
only
what?
the episode. I mean,
yeah,
we brought in other relevant things for it, but
totally. But it was all very connected. Yeah. What I'm really proud of in this episode is that we talked about all of the episode, because I feel like one of the things that's happened a lot with Acolyte is that we get on one thing and then we spin out and we talk about it in the context of larger Star Wars, and that takes us to other places or whatever. But with this one, it's like we've specifically talked about each storyline. But I think that that's by virtue of the fact that this week's episode, each one of those had sort of like questions to be answered,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Like things that needed to be discussed. Because I very easily could have just talked about Osha and Chimere for this hour and 40 minutes that we've been recording. Very easily could have done that. But I made a concerted effort of like, let's leave it to the end. We're gonna leave it to the end. I'll talk about everything else first. But the show is just fantastic. Like, and to me, like this is sort of the indicator of it, that any one of these topics we could talk about for an hour.
Sure. Yeah.
And there's so much, and when the whole series is done, to go back and rewatch it, I think there will be other stuff that reveals itself as a result. And so there's a lot to talk about here. It's a very deep show. It kills me that there are people out there that aren't connecting with it, or that aren't seeing it for what it is, and so like they don't like it. I'm not talking about the fandom menace. Like they it doesn't matter. Like they've made a decision to dislike everything that comes out. They just come up with their reasons as episodes air, right? And that's, again, this is just engagement bait. They're just they're after your engagement because it financially and narcissistically benefits them. So
yeah, I don't care about those people. I feel like I've been dealing with this since 2008 with Clone Wars. Like, no, guys, you're actually missing out on awesome stories. Oh, it was a kiddie show. Guys, shut up and watch it. And like, it's been so satisfying. Like, the few people that I've had that conversation with have like trickled over the years because, stuff like Ahsoka and Mandalorian reference Clone Wars. So like, oh, all right, let me give Clone Wars a shot. And like, hey, Clone Wars is really good. And I'm like, oh, is it? Cool.
Yeah. I talk about it all the time, and I never actually do it. And I need to actually like sit down and do it, because I have a couple of friends who are like, they're right on the cusp of liking certain things. This happened like I again earlier this week, hanging out with Curtis and his wife Katie, and they were like, yeah, like Ahsoka was good, but I can't help but feel like it would be better if I knew anything about these characters. I'm like, absolutely, yes, because it's the 5th season of Star Wars Rebels. So like the fact that you haven't watched Star Wars Rebels is absolutely a detriment to enjoying that show, because what do you care about Ezra Bridger if you don't know the character? So I was like this whole like drive towards it, like, what do you care about Sabine's journey if you don't know anything about that character? Like, Jason Syndulla means nothing to you if you have no connection to Kanan. But if you have those connections, then every time that Jason Syndulla is on screen and he's connecting to the Force, and he's, there's this potential of him being a Jedi, it's like, I get teary-eyed. Like, it affects me deeply because I care about Kanan so much. He's such an important character to me. So like it's like, yeah, absolutely, you should watch these things, but it's a lot, right? Like 7 seasons of Clone Wars, 4 seasons of Rebels, 3 seasons of Bad Batch. It's a lot to ask of someone.
Yeah.
So I really, really, really need to sit down and put together like that essential list, right? Because I think that like asking somebody to sit down and start with season 1 of Clone Wars is
it's a big ask.
It's a big ask. It's a big ask for the people who haven't already done it, right? Those of us who were going to connect with it from day one, we were there, or we've already done it. We don't need to be told, right? We don't need anybody to lead us to that specific watering hole, right? We're gonna find it ourselves, and we're gonna enjoy it. The people who are reluctant, they need to start with something with a little bit more juice, right? You need to get them in on something from season 3, right? And then maybe there's some stories in season 1 that are worth going back to, like Rookies, right? But yeah, like in terms of that, it's like you don't watch that episode in order. You watch, like, you start with oh, what's the first what the one where they come together as a team, the training one, right? The one with 99 that introduces that character, right? But
Oh, the ARC Troopers one. Yeah, it was
yeah,
what
yeah,
ARC
yeah.
Troopers and Battle for Camino.
Yeah. So like starting with I watching the show in order is not like watching Clone Wars in order. I don't think is the way to do it. Watching every episode of Rebels, I also don't think is the way to do it, because I think that like Lando Calrissian showing up with some puffer pigs is really fun, but it's quite inconsequential to the rest of the
Sure.
story,
Yeah.
right? Like everything that's accomplished with the characters of Star Wars Rebels in that episode is accomplished in other episodes. There's nothing unique about that episode. It's just a fun episode of Star Wars. So if you're into it, then absolutely enjoy it. But otherwise, I don't think it's essential viewing, right?
Mm.
But yeah, like I think that there's like hey, if you liked Ahsoka, here are the episodes of Clone Wars and Rebels to go back and watch, right? If you like Sabine, here are the episodes to, if you like, this part of the Mandalorian, if you like Bo-Katan, here, right? Like go back and watch this stuff. But um yeah, so I really need to do that for people, and I don't know, maybe that's like an episode. I if we say that we'll do it as an episode later, then that's like an impetus for me
Mm.
to go back and do it, and then we can discuss it as an episode of like these are the episodes and this is the reasons why. And then I'll have that list, and then I can give it to people, and then
Cool.
yeah.
And then we convert more.
It's not even so much about converting them to liking Rebels and Clone Wars. It's
Right.
about making sure that they're watching the Mandalorian and Ahsoka properly,
Mm.
right? And not coming at me and going like, "Yeah, I don't know. I don't really care about these characters." And it's like, well, that's because you didn't watch it in the right order, you dum dum.
I mean, I feel like I've mentioned this specific one before, but like I so I'm the Star Wars guy in my neighborhood, right? Like anytime my neighbors watch, Ahsoka or Mando or whatever, they come to me with questions like, "Oh, who is this person? Why are they important?" I will never forget like after Solo came out, my neighbor was like, "Is Han Solo that old? Like this was before Phantom Menace, the story, because Darth Maul's there, right? So
Yeah.
when does this take place?" And I'm like, "Oh, buddy, oh
Yeah.
man,
Let me learn you a thing.
no."
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little crazy. I mean, like, it's Star Wars is at one time, like in one manner of speaking, infinitely accessible,
Mm,
because there are so many great entry points into it now. But at the same time, it's like, where do you begin? Like,
yeah.
but I was saying to Curtis and Katie on Monday, I was saying like that is the question that I get asked the most over the last 16 years of podcasting about Star Wars. The thing that is the most common is people asking me like, "Oh, I've got a friend who wants to get into Star Wars. What order should I watch the movies?
Mm,
Like, what order should I present it to them?" And people say that as if there's one silver bullet answer, like the machete order or something.
right.
It's like the machete order is really fun for us fans who have watched Star Wars over and over, I think, but because it makes you look at things in a different perspective, and there are other orders that you like to do that, right? Like there are all sorts of like different viewing methods. But for me now, I look at it and I go like, there's so much Star Wars, there are so many ways into it. The best thing to do is to look at the individual and to figure out, what are you going to connect with specifically.
Mm,
What else do you like? Do you like Avatar the Last Airbender? Well, oh boy, do I have something for you. Because if you're a big fan of Avatar the Last Airbender, I don't think that starting on A New Hope is necessarily the best place to start, right? I think starting on the Clone Wars might actually be better, because I can very easily go like, yeah, Dave Filoni, there's a connection here, and there's some very similar storytelling. Um, if you're a huge anime fan, then like, let's watch some Star Wars Visions, right? Because like that'll get you into the world, and then it's like, okay, you like that? Let's check out some other stuff, right? Like there are so many entry points in now that like it has to be an individual thing, but yeah, and I think like the Acolyte is such a great new one of like, man, I think it's a really great starting point for Star Wars. I think it, like, if you have no experience with Star Wars, that you need very little pop culture knowledge, of this world in order to get into this story. As a matter of fact, I think it might even be better if you had no prior knowledge of Star Wars coming into this, with no preconceived notions, no like you're figuring this out as it goes. I think that it would actually be a really great show. Because you'd just be into the characters. You'd just be like, what's going on? And you'd just be so like, I think you'd just be so enthralled by the Force stuff because it's such a wide swath of it presented in one story, as opposed to what we get in the original trilogy, which is very much one perspective of the Force, right? So yeah. Anyways,
that's been one of my favorite aspects of the show myself. Like obviously I am a Star Wars fan. Like I know Star Wars, but the whole just not knowing anything about any of these characters has been so fun. Like there's no real I'm not worried about Ki-Adi-Mundi showing up, but when he does, it's like, oh, okay, cool. But like in Mandalorian, it's like, oh, what are the implications of this? How is this going to affect this part? You know what I mean? Like it's just like, oh no, cool, new characters. We're telling a fun story, and it's doing its own thing, and that's all you really like. You don't have to look into it at all. Just let it be its own thing. It's really cool.
Yeah. Mando suffers from the fact that Luke, Han, and Leia are right there.
Right. Yeah.
They're just off screen. Right. In some instances, not right. Luke is in the shows. But yeah, like Leia is just off screen and like and affects the story in Ahsoka directly. Right. So it's like, yeah, we're always kind of, I think, constantly thinking about it and worried about those connections in with these characters. But with Acolyte, it's so far removed from everything that we have so much freedom. That excites me about the Rey movie, because like it's going to be however many years after Rise of Skywalker, and the original trilogy characters are gone, right? And not gone. Like Luke can absolutely show up in that story. There's not a problem with that. Yoda can show up, right? Obi-Wan can show up.
Technically Leia, but I kind of don't want her to.
Technically Leia, but I don't think we'll see it. But I would love to see some of those characters show up in Force Ghost form. I really love to see Obi-Wan show up. But we'll be far enough removed, I think, at that point that like it can really, really be Rey's story, right? That we'll be able to do new stuff with it. So I don't know. I'm still very excited for that movie. So. Anyways, that's getting off on a whole other topic, and we're closing in on 2 hours. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Okay. Thank you guys for listening. We've got 2 episodes of The Acolyte left. And then after that, we're going to take like probably a 1 week break, maybe 2 weeks. And then we'll come back with our sort of regular content, and get into some other stuff. But yeah, we'll be back next week. With the penultimate episode of The Acolyte. I think things are going to get very exciting next week. I can't wait. It's going to be a long wait from Tuesday to Tuesday this week, but it's coming. It is coming. So we will talk to you guys then. Thank you for listening. See you later. Follow Force Perspectives on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ForcePOV. And join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. Support the show by visiting us at patreon.com/thunderquack to get early access to episodes, leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast service, or buy merch at store.thunderquack.com. Force Perspectives is a part of the ThunderQuack Podcast Network.